With Buen Vivir as our theme, we aim to bring to light the ancestral wisdoms of Indigenous peoples of the Global South. We celebrate that restorative agriculture is rooted in longstanding cultural practices of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. If you'll be joining us on Saturday in person in Worcester, there are a couple caucus groups you might be interested in happening at the lunch hour. This slide has a bunch of organizations that some of us work with and ways you can center racial equity in your communities. If you work with or know of other groups, also please feel free to plop them in the chat. Thank you to our partner level sponsors, Stonyfield Organic. And thank you to our partner level sponsors here. We have a number of sponsors who help make our conference possible, and we encourage you to purchase from them. And when you do, let them know you appreciate their support of NOFAMASS. And a little plug here, if you are coming on Saturday to bring a soil sample. There'll be folks helping to do soil technical assistance. And lastly, Emma is here joining us, who can probably put in the chat the auction, the incredible items to bid on in the online auction. So check that out. And at this point, if you can bear with me for 1 second, I am pleased to introduce Stephen Taranto. Is an applied ecologist with a particular focus on the ecology and resilience of farm and food systems. He's lived in and worked on sustainable agriculture food sheds in the US, Costa Rica, Panama, and Bolivia, and is now working in Western Massachusetts as the Climate Program Coordinator for Community Involved in Sustaining Agriculture, or CISA. Thanks for being with us today, Stephen. Take it away.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good evening. And I would like to invite as many of you as feel comfortable to turn on your video, please, because this will not be a lecture type of workshop or webinar this evening. This evening will be as successful and meaningful as we make it together as a group, because the way that the workshop is set up, we'll mostly be having conversations with one another about our own experiences, communicating around climate change, and ways that we have seen others communicating about it as well. And hopefully we'll come away with some ideas of how we can continue to improve the way that we communicate about this issue. So if you can get those videos on, I would really appreciate it. And I just have a few slides that I'm gonna share with you tonight. Hello, Hannah. Hello, Kim. Thank you, Douglas. Dan, there we go. Thank you, everybody. Makes a big difference. I know you can't always get your video on, but I do appreciate it when you can. So, as the title of my this webinar hopefully makes clear, hopefully I was good communicating about this. You know, the topic is talking about climate change and farming with friends, customers, colleagues, and our communities. And you can see here, there's only 3 images I'm going to share with you tonight. You can see on this first screen, these images are all from the very recent flooding events that took place here in the Connecticut River Valley. And these were 3 communication events that I was involved with through my work at CISA. The top visit to a farm where we had community members walking through damaged fields and learning about what had happened to the farm that they purchased produce from. In the second slide, we have legislators who we're meeting with to speak with about the impacts. We have Lindsay Sabadosa here and Joe Comerford, who are both respectively state rep and state senator from our region here. And in the bottom, we have a farmer speaking with a journalist, a photojournalist, who I was able to send to one of the farms that was severely affected so that we could capture some images in the moment that would allow us to do our work at CISA, which is often around finding ways to provide direct aid to farms. And I bring these up because I found in my work that I do at CISA, at Community Involved in Sustaining Agriculture, I'm an ecologist by training, and I've had to become a communicator by profession. And so because at CISA, in my work and in the organization in general, we communicate with so many different audiences. The idea to create a space with people such as yourselves where we could sort of open up and look at some ways that we can better communicate about a very complex issue could be useful. So I'm hoping that this space will be just that for you this evening. So to get things rolling, I would just like to hear from some of the participants why you selected to participate in this workshop. What was it that attracted you to the idea of hearing about or talking about communication around climate change? There were other workshops tonight that you could have gone to. Why was this one the one that you found interesting? Nancy?
I guess because I do spend a lot of time talking about climate change, and I have a garden project, it's a demonstration organic gardening project with other master gardeners, and whenever I can, I use the words climate change, and nobody's disagreeing anymore like they used to or looking away. I think people are gaining an awareness. Obviously, this has been a year that has really attracted people's attention. And then coincidentally, and I don't think this is why I signed up necessarily, but because of the floods and it's affected farmers along the Connecticut River in Connecticut, our governor, who didn't really do much for climate legislation this year, loved to have a press conference at one of the farms and has been quoted in a couple of the papers as basically opening his comments by saying, "What the hell is going on around here?" It infuriated me, and I haven't written I've written in my head my letter to the editor probably a half a dozen times, but that's just the kind of thing where we just can't allow that people to actually know what's happening anymore. And also, I believe farmers need to start speaking up more. I'm not one, and I don't want to cast aspersions, but they have such a powerful voice, and they know what's going on. So I'm just curious how we, bring them into the conversation and make it comfortable for them.
Okay, thank you. And if you don't mind, Nancy, there was a word I'd like to pick out of what you said, which is, this idea of something being infuriating. And I think that is an emotion that we often have to deal with when we're trying to communicate about issues where we know injustice is a part of the problem, right? Or severe economic damage or severe environmental damage. And it's that kind of emotion that we can learn to channel in ways that we would hope, the result that we want, whether that's changing the mind of a neighbor or changing the mind of a senator. I see Lenore, you have your hand up. What brought you here?
Hi, Stephen and everybody.
Hello.
So I'm not a farmer, but I am a gardener. But I co-founded a group called the Regenerative Farming, Forests and Food Systems Group of Climate Action Now. So I'm always every single day talking about climate change and biodiversity collapse and ecosystem regeneration. And part of the mission of this group originally was to support farmers in learning how to speak up, and the need for them, because no one can speak about it in the way they can. And my experience with farmers have been that they don't realize how much power they have, besides that they're too busy. I mean, I'm too busy. We're all too busy to do this activism work, and we shouldn't have to do it. We, you know, if we heeded the warnings 50 years ago, we wouldn't be doing it. We'd be enjoying living on this earth, not just trying to defend, you know, not just speaking for nature, but wanted to be in this group to hear what other people need, what the knowledge gaps are, how we can support, you know, what I can do as an individual and as an organizer to be part of this coalition that must speak up. I mean, the floods are speaking for themselves, but there's a lot. Everybody's got to be at the table, and I just want to be at the table with everybody who has to be at the table.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other world of the communication that work that we have to do. You know, how do we amp up the severity of the situation without either repelling people, you know, or leaving people feeling hopeless and helpless. And what you mentioned, Lenore, is exactly how I hope this brief hour we have together will go, which is to hear from other folks' experiences as well. And so I really would also encourage that nobody expect that I'm always going to have the response or the recap of what others in this space have said. Feel free to respond to each other as well with your own insights and experiences. And so with that said, Kim, what brought you here?
So I am a new director of advocacy for Connecticut NOFA, part-time job. And I was up at the state legislature during this session. And I participated, for example, in a press conference where the first thing that I said is farmers and farm workers are on the front lines of climate change. And nobody had said that before in the legislative session. There was lots of discussion of various climate bills, none of which passed really, but nobody had really brought farmers and farm workers as people who should be centered in our discussions of climate change in our state. And I pointed out, as Nancy, who's in my same state in Connecticut, said, the floods were a disaster. Before that, we had an unusual warm spell followed by a hard freeze, which was a climate disaster. And the head of the Department of Agriculture said in the previous 3 years, we had a climate disaster every year. So in agriculture. So I think that message is just not getting through. People think of climate change as affecting natural systems, as affecting people in cities, but they don't think about climate change as affecting farmers and farm workers. And I think that's very important.
Do you think there's something particular about Connecticut's economy or their slate of elected legislators that has caused them to maybe overlook or not pay as much attention to agriculture?
Well, Connecticut does not think of itself as an agricultural state for the most part. So I think that's probably part of it. There, but you know, there is certainly agriculture, and agriculture is disproportionately, the agricultural parts of the state are disproportionately represented in the legislature. And so we need to make sure that those people representing the agricultural parts of the state get that message.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a whole stew of communication work that is desperately needed in Connecticut. Gillian or Jillian, I'm sorry if I don't get your name right. Would you like to tell us what brought you here?
Sure thing. You got it right. It's Jillian.
Okay.
Farms for the past couple of years and have studied agroecology, and I think one of the main drives for selecting this event to attend was looking to hear any sort of examples or start conversations about how to, just kind of echoing what it's already been said, how to grapple with these issues that are so distressing, bring up and fear, and even with that, the people you talk to with it. And yeah, just meditating on ways of how to do the topic in a way that is honest, but also, you know, empowering, and not focusing too much on the doom and gloom of it, I guess. Engaging with people as if they are capable of having this conversation, and getting more confident within ourselves about it as well. And yeah, everyday conversations that you have with people, and also in work. And I guess some of it has to do something, but also navigating just daily conversations, I guess.
And in your farm work, do you, well, let's get to that in just a minute. Anybody else care to share a little bit about what brought you here? Because we are going to go actually into some more introductions of everybody else in the group. So we can, I'd like to just move on to that.
Sounds good. Stephen, I can read a couple things from the chat, or we can just move on if that seems best.
Let me just, this is just a super simple recap, and then we're going to get into, I think, a better space for more discussion. But I did want to give a little bit of structure to our space. It's not just a free-for-all, so to speak, although that would be, that there's a place for that too. But, you know, I think the idea of this space, as maybe I've already explained, is to just hear from each other about how we are or aren't talking about climate change in our respective work, where things seem to be easy, where we've had success, where it's been difficult. And then I'm hoping that by the end of this brief time, we'll have just a few minutes to maybe brainstorm some really concrete tips and tricks that we can keep in mind as we go forward in our work. It's hard to do all that in an hour, but we'll see where we get. And so what I wanted to do now is open up to the other folks that have joined us today. And what I would like to hear, and I think I'm hearing would be useful to others in the group, is, you know, where you're from and what work you do related to agriculture or food production, if you're a home gardener and so forth. Where specifically you find yourself talking about climate change. Are you speaking with people in a farm store? Are you speaking with relatives? Are you speaking with family members? Do you have employees on a farm that you need to communicate with? And then if there's something in particular, like Kim, it sounds like there's something very important that you feel needs to be communicated to your state legislator, that there are farms in Connecticut. So I think that would be interesting for us to hear if you have a particular project or goal that you're working on at this time. So with that said, Zaya, how about those questions that we have in the chat, and then we can continue to go around the room?
Oh, not questions, but Hannah and Dan had chimed in just with their thoughts. I'm happy to read them, or we can launch into what you've laid out.
All right. Hannah, yes.
Definitely an emotional topic that people are still learning to talk about without doom or fear being the center of the conversation, while not dismissing how crucial individual and collective action are. And Dan says, I believe that climate change is a priority and a pivot point for remaking a sustainable food system. Everything is connected.
Great, thank you. Well, Hannah, can we just put you on the spot for an introduction, and maybe if you've had some experiences where the emotion of the topic was an issue for you, be nice to hear that as well.
Sure, yeah. Well, so I am the
I know you, Hannah. I just
well, I know
recognized
you do, but do other people want to know me? I don't know. I work with nofamass, and I'm the events manager here now, and I'm in a lot of spaces where obviously in agriculture, climate change is being talked about. And I find myself not talking so much about it in family-oriented contexts, actually, because of its history as a divisive topic. Now it's being more integrated as commonplace and kind of like, well, I guess there's nothing you could do about it, which we all know is not true, but just something that people like to take because of, or default to taking, a stance people default to taking because of the lack of, concrete action that they could take. And never mind, folks not really understanding, like my parents, that they are part of a collective that can take action. But when I saw, here's a kind of a brief example. When I saw the Feeding New England, the 30 by 30 report that came out recently, they were speaking about how we could possibly feed 30% of New England by 2030. And then especially in the face of climate change. And that was a really emotional read for me, because it almost, basically, from what I understand, is they were saying it's going to be really, 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 really hard. And I was like, no, it can't be that hard, just like this overwhelm of, there has to be some way where we can, localize our food systems more and mitigate and adapt to climate change in the process of it. And how agroforestry or forest farming was completely dismissed, like not even discussed in this report as a viable solution to not only feed people, but mitigate and adapt to climate change. And so I'm feeling like myself as a professional and a passionate individual and all these things, being at a loss for words, or just like getting all cranked up in the face and the cheeks of just like, ugh, so frustrating. And really wanting to collectivize action and not just think about, like recycling and all those sorts of things that, has been presented as a solution in the past. So it's always great to be in spaces with people who are thinking of that, and how we can band together and actually be a part of that collective action, and seeing more and more. So thank you, Stephen, for holding a space like this to really set that as a baseline of something that we can do, even when we're not in a conference setting, for example.
Thank you, Hannah. For the folks who arrived more recently, it'd be great if any of you would be able to put your cameras on so we could just say hello to you and feel that you're a part of our conversation. If you can't, of course, that's fine, but it'd be great to see you and say hello. And I'm just wondering, has anybody in this group ever had a similar experience like Hannah, a real visceral emotion when you read something and then wondering how could we possibly mobilize enough people to make this change? Just wondering, raise your hand if you've ever experienced that in your work or in your personal life. Everybody, can you please all raise your hands? I think it's good to, take this moment together to realize we're all kind of trying to crack the same nut when it comes to expressing the urgency of what's happening with the practicality that Hannah describes. Like, what can I actually do? I'm already doing everything I think that I can, or I'm not doing anything, and everything in between. And so, yeah, I think that's something that we're all trying to figure out. So how about a few more introductions from other folks? Dan, could we hear a little bit more about where you fit in with the communication piece?
You hear me okay?
Yes, welcome.
All right. Thank you. So first of all, I want to say the farm I worked at last year, which is an organic farm in Suffield, says they need CISA there in Connecticut. It's like, we need something like that. We need more advocacy. So a few years back, I went into food and sustainability, studied for a certificate at Cornell, left my job in the fitness and wellness world as an operational manager for 30 some odd years, and felt like I needed to do something much more important. Not that that wasn't important. And I've always been into nutrition, so kind of get crazy on some podcasts about the food system, and definitely tied in with climate change and the capitalistic approach that is harming the climate, which is harming the food system, and everything kind of becomes this circle. So I educate all sorts of individuals. I'm a SNAP Ed educator, so that's USDA funded by Massachusetts. We go out to schools. We have a community garden. We're really doing well on the how do you grow your own food side, but I feel like we're a small department, and even sometimes discussing climate change in my own department seems like, am I the only one that's really like way in here? They're all good, and some are really trying to use that thought process every time they make a decision. I'm also on advisor for the Energy and Sustainability Committee in my town, and we had recently a state senator and a state rep come in and say that every decision in Massachusetts, as far as they're concerned, will be based on climate going forward. I'm like, okay, we hope that gets stuck to. So yeah, I do get a little down at times. When I studied food and sustainability, they said it would be depressing, and it was. But we all have to kind of band together, like Hannah said, and try to get on to, the good part, the solution part.
And Dan, what are the main audiences that you find yourself communicating with, or where you might be moved to bring up climate change?
Yeah, so it's hard to really bring up climate change and the brokenness of the food system in our education classes, but more often it's in the space of colleagues, other people that are connected in committees, the connection I have in the farm. I try to blog, so try to get the word out the best I can. But I find it's like not everybody wants to talk about this, but they're like what Hannah said, I'm aware. Oh yeah, it is a thing.
Yeah. All right, thanks. Dady, I see your hand up. Would you like to introduce yourself and let us know where climate change communication is a part of your work or life?
Yes, my name is Diane DeLond, and I'm in Vermont in the town of Eden, just about maybe an hour and a half away from the Canadian border. And I think, many Vermonters probably thought at some point in time that we could be a bit of a climate haven. And of course, that has proven to be quite the opposite. I've been driving around some area farms here. I'm basically what you would regard as a homesteader and a gardener, and I am very much interested in having a market garden. I grow about under an acre of vegetables here. Had to cut back a little bit this year to manage some family health matters. I, over the years, have been very concerned about this control of the food supply, you know, just in the hands of just a limited number of corporations and all of those issues that go along with that. And, you know, just being up here and at any place in the world, actually, there's many, many wonderful things going on around the world in terms of I don't want to use the word sustainable because some corporations overuse that, but practicing agroecology, many people going back to the land, living in earthships. You know, there's a lot of good things that people are trying to do to live closer to the earth and actually live with nature as opposed to against it. So I think when I get to the point where sometimes when I put on a former journalist hat, which is not what I'm wearing now, but I'm seeing reports that, quite frankly, are nerve-wracking. There was a report that's come out just recently that the circulatory system, let me just put this up, the North Atlantic circulation system, my iPhone behave itself for 1 second, is about to collapse, or it's going into a new phase. So we may see, and this came out from ABC News in Australia picked it up, and I believe they quoted a NASA scientist. It was covered in Nature, the premier journal called Nature News, warning of forthcoming collapse of the Atlantic overturning circulation system. Now, that could mean that we're going to see more extremes, you know, as the Arctic heats up. According to the report, it appears to be, and some people may know this already, because I think there was another report out just a few years ago that might be pushing the Arctic air, the cold Arctic air down and into what we call the polar vortex. And then in other seasons, you know, we're getting this, if it's cold, it's suddenly at different times of the year, it's taking that warm air and pushing it down and circulating it into a different wave pattern, if you will. So,
and I'm sorry to interrupt, but
when I just want to jump 1 second. When I see that, I think to myself, okay, I got to put a good hat on here. I can't go running around to my friends at the farm saying everything's about to fall apart. Maybe it won't fall apart, but I just try to emphasize, you know, it'd be great if we just call your car company and say, I would really like that electric car. You know, that I see in another model. You know, I'd like to be able to drive that around when I transport my horses, because I'm taking classes in horse-powered agriculture, which is great, or horse-powered animal farming. But geez, you know, when I do this, then I got to have a diesel-powered truck in order to haul the trailer. So what can I do about that? It could be electric.
Yeah.
You know, I try to think of whatever I'm doing, how can I translate that into something good and feel good about it? You know, that's I should get off my soapbox, but I'm very passionate about this because I'm seeing so much information that's not getting into the mainstream news cycle here in the United States. And that, you know, I might be doing something about that with friends, another discussion another time. But you know, I had just when the floods happened in Vermont, I get an email from an old friend I used to work with in Boston, who's currently in Austria, and they just had a heavy rain event, and their villages were flooded in the mountains, and they were pulling together and going through similar phases that many people in New England have just gone through, and people in other parts of the world have gone through. And I get another message from a friend in Australia, so it's Australia to Austria, these heavy rain events.
Yeah.
You know, occurring simultaneously. But
Well, thank you. I'm
so-
sorry to interrupt, but I do want to hear from a few more of the folks that have joined us today.
I promise it's really good. Last thing, and I'll be quiet, I promise. Good news, rainwater harvesting.
Yeah.
When that heavy rain is coming down, we're about to install a rainwater harvester. Just take that water, let it run right off your gutters into these cistern tanks and save it, circulate it, use that in case you get the opposite effect of drought. You know, and
Yes.
you water those crops, even if you're using drip lines and stuff like that. It's just looking at, all right, this is bad. I'm a realist. Okay, I'm going to look at something. This is the way exactly it is, but what can I do about it? Something good. I mean, this rainwater harvesting is really helping a lot of people, and I'm going to stop it. I'm off my soapbox.
Well,
But
you know,
thank
if you install that system for yourself and you can communicate that to one other person, you have successfully used communication as a tool to enact a change. So I think any skill is relevant at this point. Now, I'm looking here. I'd like to maybe call on Douglas. If you could briefly tell us where you're coming from and how communication around climate is a part of your work. I think you're on mute.
Thanks. Yep. I just had to get to the button there, clean my hands off. Thanks, everyone. I'm Doug, and I'm a nofamass board member. I'm coming from Pawtucket area, which is the northeast side of Massachusetts, in the current day area of Cochee-Cheywick, which is actually Boxford, Massachusetts. And I was speaking with my niece over dinner last night, and we got into talking to some of the broad overarching reasons that we're in such a climate catastrophe. And I think I was sort of harping on the economic position and the way that we give money so much power over our lives, and centering profit and economic development, or centering profit as development and using it as a benchmark for success. She was looked at me and was like, well, what's the solution? And I was like, there's no solution. But it was it was a depressing answer. But really, the solution is reciprocity and coming back to, community focused solutions, and building community health and soil health and ecological health, in all the decisions that we make. And so coming to the table, I think we all share, this language right now is English, and we're using it to, create the change that we think we can see for the future. And, there's lots of different languages. So right now, I think, we just have to take this one and work with it and use it in a really constructive way. And so I think the art of conversation and hosting events in this way to open up where I usually come into play and see myself advocating for some change. I'm happy to pass it on to somebody.
Sure, go ahead. That'd be great.
Anybody want to raise their hand? I will call on someone. Otherwise, Mary Mannix, would you like to share your perspective?
Sure, I hope you can hear me. The neighbor has been mowing his lawn, so that's
We hear you.
okay. I was best on mute. I am a former retired board member of NOFA, and I think we are certainly in a very difficult situation, but I think we have lots of reasons to hope. And I think it's up to us to get a handle and educate ourselves as to what's going on and the audiences we'll speak to. When we need to get into the details, we get into the details. When we need to go bigger picture, we need to go bigger picture. But we all know that we have to do more than one thing at once. We can't just talk about fossil fuels or how we can help in other ways. Really, we certainly need a handle on our fossil fuels, but I think a better way is to educate ourselves, to be able to talk to people and explain to them that our agency with this climate issue is land management. And how do we manage our lawns as well as our farms and everything around us? We are in a particular situation also because we've got, we're in a temperate climate. So a lot of the issues with the dust storms and everything were Midwest, where they'll have dry periods and more moist periods, and now their hydrological systems are all thrown off. But, you know, here in the Northeast, our issue is too much water. And if there's bare ground, nature covers it up quickly because we're a temperate climate. So for us to restore our hydrological systems, that's someplace we definitely have agency. So I think we have to educate ourselves to be able to speak to that. And my favorite person to listen to, who gives me a lot of hope, and this is what I do, this is a really challenging situation we have here now, as I go to those incredible experts that can give us hope. And one of them is Walter Yana. He's an Australian microbiologist. And he has some beautiful talks. One of them I love is on a podcast that is on the Real Organic Project. So, you know, NOFAMass is very familiar with that. We have such a gift with NOFAMass because they can get out the information that's necessary for our farmers. We have to realize that these issues are not going to be solved with our government because they can only look ahead to the next election. And we've got to look a little bit bigger than that. And that's okay. We can do it. This isn't necessarily the challenge here. This isn't a capitalistic answer because you don't make a lot of money from land management, right? So the government's not going to jump on board. You can make money from doing technology about fossil fuels. But the big issue is we've got to manage our land, which will reset our hydrological cycles. We need to educate ourselves. There is a lot of hope out there. Another wonderful person, we all know him, Alan Savory. Listen again to his TED Talk, and then again. Go back and listen to Walter Yana again. He's just amazing as he talks on the Real Organic Podcast. Explains everything about that greenhouse effect and how it's messed up our hydrology, which we are suffering from in Vermont. So lots we can do, but we need to focus on where we have agency, and that's land management. And then speak to people on a bigger level. If they're not farmers, the farmers will speak amongst themselves, thankfully, with a NOFAMass, with a Real Organic Project. We got it going on. But we also have to get out to the masses because then they also vote and they'll speak up too. This got to be grassroots, can't just be farmer driven, even though our food system is in dire straits. There's lots that can happen. So I'm feeling positive about it when I'm not feeling negative. So hopefully it's,
All right.
you know, more than 50% positive.
Thank you. I'm just looking over some of the notes that I've been taking and realizing, as everybody has shared a little bit, the multitude of communication channels that you are all engaged in with your different work, whether it's at the dinner table with your niece like Douglas, or like Kim going to the state legislature. We've heard of some of you that use podcasts have been successful for communicating to you. So just hopefully you're picking up on these different tools that people in this room who care about communicating about this issue are mentioning to us as we hear from all of you, because that's really the richness of how we're gonna work ourselves out of this mess. It won't be just a podcast. As you said, Mary, it's not just going to be the government. We have to keep all these channels activated. And again, as Douglas said, it boils down to the art of conversation. Now, we have a few people that we haven't heard from yet. However, we do have a breakout group exercise that we do need about 20 minutes to go through. So I would just like to ask the folks that have not introduced themselves, I wish we had more time, just to tell us who you are, where you're coming from, and what's your climate angle. Catherine, could we start with you? I'm sorry to shorten the time, but we'll make the most of it.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm in the library. I didn't know if this is going to work. I'm in a community garden in Northampton, and I live in an apartment. I mean, just this morning, a landscape company cut down a tree that was about 100 years old and is busy sequestering carbon. They used a lot of fossil fuel. It took them about an hour, and they reduced it to wood chips. And my neighbor says, it's brighter now, you know, more sun in her apartment. So there's some people I can't talk to. And there's an issue about like who owns the land that we think about trying to manage or trying to affect the management of. And I feel like I can't do what I want, you know, with land that is owned by my landlord. And I can't really do what I want in the community garden either. And I'm thinking about trying to buy land. I have a little bit of inherited money that I might be able to do that. But yeah, I think that's one of the things that's a big issue in our capitalist system about who owns
So how
the
do
land
we
and how do we access land ownership, you know, if we want to
Yeah.
be farmers or homesteaders or anything like that. So, but for now, you know, I'm a community gardener, and I ride my bike all around town, and I do, you know, try to live an example of, you know, as little fossil fuel as I can. And I also do a lot of political campaigning too. I mean, I think it's important, you know, who runs our government, and I get involved in that every chance I get, you know, with elections, having conversations door to door. So.
Okay, thank you, Catherine.
Stuff I do.
And this is another communication channel, living by example. So thank you for reminding us that that is another way we can communicate about these issues. Anybody else like to introduce themselves? Dale?
So Lenore stole my thunder. She put the website in that I update for Climate Action Now, with you know, always looking for content that's going to help us connect the different aspects of our focus: farming, forests, and food systems. With several other people in the housing community that I'm in, we managed to get the landscaper to stop using pesticides on the lawn, which at that point was pretty big. No one else seemed to have achieved that locally, and I'm in Northampton. And other people who are in this same community are working on trying to preserve our space. There's about 70 acres all total between two communities that we're trying to push the invasives out of, preserve for biodiversity, and educate our neighbors about native plants. So a lot of my focus has been that in recent years, and I work also with the various groups that are trying to protect forests. So that's where my interests lie.
So you're communicating with many different kinds of stakeholders. Yeah, and probably need to craft your communications messages, you know, according to each audience. Well, we could probably have a whole webinar on that, Dale, so maybe we'll hit you up. Anybody else interested in introducing themselves? Nagisa? Then I think we got everybody. Is that fair to say? Carol.
Did. Sorry, I was slow. I don't need to introduce myself. So. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Okay.
Well,
I can introduce myself.
great.
Hi. Hi, everyone. My name's Ilana. I'm a farmer in so-called Rhode Island, which is Narragansett land. I grow native plants and fruits, vegetables, herbs, flowers, sometimes mushrooms. And with climate communication, I think that it's very important to look to the voices of local native folks and start there. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilana. Okay, so we are going to, I see Emma's hand. Emma, is your hand still up?
My hand was up, yes, but it is mostly just because I wanted to direct people to the chat if they're interested and that have been shared.
Okay.
And so, yeah, and just a time check.
Yes, we're running short. And I do appreciate the reference to Catherine Hayhoe from Nancy. I do recommend that you look for her YouTube videos and her writing, because she really has thought this communication piece through very deeply. Lenore, well, Carol, I'm sorry. I'm going to ask Carol to just introduce herself quickly.
Okay. Simply a gardener, always caring about food and all of that. I think so often we've been given stories about that are not necessarily true. I'm not sure if it was on Freakonomics radio recently that talked about how sugar manipulated the whole story so that we ended up with being told, we have to reduce fats. And I think so often people are so focused on their health and trying to solve problems that have been created by misinformation to begin with. I'm just going to jump around very quickly. Planet of the Humans, if anyone saw that film, this is another example of how maybe we should not just jump to electric, because in that film done by Michael Moore, he pointed out that he tried to get responsible people to tell us where the energy is coming from for the electric cars. And there may still be things like cutting down our forests, real ones, not just scrap wood to burn to generate the electricity. So we may be, I want to go, we have solar panels, we do this stuff, but I just want to, I think people should educate themselves just a bit more in case the solutions we're being told are just going to enrich a new market and not maybe quite do the job. So Planet of the Humans was a very informative film. But the other thing is, I do want to walk more hand in hand, side by side with somebody before you diverge and try and take them into an area they're not familiar with. But you have to tell them how it's affecting them. We can't just say the farmers need your support. We have to say, we have to build our argument on how does this benefit you? How will it harm you? Just you, the average living person, the average consumer. We can't expect them to care about the farmers if they don't make the connection about how those farmers are going to be affecting our food supply and our prices. And then other than just telling our neighbors, I was talking to somebody in Lowe's today about climate change. I was buying gutters to make a new system to divert the water. I'm trying to convince my husband that we need rain barrels for that diverted water for afterwards. But anyway, she says, oh, the weather's been terrible. And I try and go side by side, but take her to, this has been happening for quite a while and we need to think about the big picture. So I know I'm jumping about, I've heard a lot of things and agree with all of it, but how it benefits the individual, because we all think, well, many people think too many people on the earth, so well, if some starve, you know, we've just got too many people. But I learned in NOFA classes that it is about soil management and micro, small systems that affect the weather all over the place. And so that's jumping about, but a few ideas.
Thank you, Carol. So you're using this side by side sort of as an approach. You're thinking, okay, I'm going to consciously
be where the person is. We can't, you can't take somebody to a new place until you try to find out where they are and not and try not to antagonize. I wish I could remember the book. There was one recently where this guy was talking about just getting people to vote and talking to all different kinds of people, but taking the approach of finding the commonality first and then moving them. When in Worcester, Mass, they were doing an anti-fluoride campaign. Years later, I spoke to her and she said, you can't just tell people what's wrong, what's going to be a problem. You have to give them the positive direction and the positive solutions and let them feel like they have agency in the positive solutions that will be benefiting them.
Thank you, Carol. Lenore, did you have something you wanted to share?
Yeah, if it's okay, just in response to some of the things that have been coming up. And I agree with Carol, one way to think about that is listening before you talk, like feeling that person before you give them what you think they need is good anyway to talk about anything. There's been some mention of like the doom and gloom and the emotional anxiety. And I just want to, this is my other hat. This is my professional hat. I just want to make a point that part of what's going on is that people are scared to grieve. We are all scared to grieve, and we have to grieve because the way that we have been living is not sustainable, and we have to change the way that we live, and people are scared to change because that's connected to being scared of being sad, of grieving, of letting go, of changing. And so this touches on everything. This touches on everybody's survival strategy. And so just to be aware that when you're talking about this, you're also touching on those very, very deep-rooted fears of people. And that we need to confront that in ourselves. We need to be really gentle with ourselves and understand that, yes, we're going to have to change how we live, but how we live doesn't define that we live. What's important is that we live, not our lifestyle. And to be able to remind people of that, we can still live, and we are part of nature, and we can still be beautiful with nature, but not in the way that we've been. It can't be the way that we've been. And that's why everybody's talking about having to work holistically, because it's not just about foods or farms or electricity or energy renewables, or it's about everything. And so it's big for people. And I also just want to mention that I put a link in the chat because we need to help each other and educate each other. And there's a lot of resources, and the more places that you can find them in one place, the easier that is than following like a million different speakers. And so I put a link in the chat to our group that has a lot of different resources that also link with a lot of other different resources and that help you work with people that are already working on these issues. So.
Thank you, Lenore. Any other comments on this, overcoming the feelings of doom and gloom when we're trying to communicate about these issues? It has definitely come up from several of you. How are you putting a positive spin on what you might internally consider to be worthy of deep grieving, as Lenore pointed out? Any of you work with children where you might be moved to Gillian? Or, I'm sorry, did I get that wrong?
It's Jillian, yeah.
Sorry,
Ray's
Jillian.
all the time. Yeah, something I've found particularly inspiring when it comes to just finding an alternative to kind of the doomerism, as I would say, is all of the works of like almost propaganda for making change, I guess. Showing people an exciting alternative and what that could look like. And something I'm really interested in is speculative fiction of just showing these alternative, hopeful futures of what things could look like, and very much practicing hope in your daily life and expressing what you would like to see from the world. And kind of taking that angle when it comes to trying to mitigate some of the grief that can come up in these conversations, and that can be processed properly in the way that we do need to feel that pain sometimes. But just knowing that, finding comfort in knowing that we can come on another side of it and dare to be open-minded. You know, it's not necessarily everything's going to go to hell in a handbasket or everything's going to like be great, but it's like, okay, well, what could happen, and trying to open up a bit of curiosity in that. And that's something I'm trying to just, that's something that's not a new idea, but it's something that I'm definitely trying to practice and trying to making space for the grief and all the feelings that come up with it, but also using curiosity and inspiration and imagination to be able to practice hope and kind of dig ourselves out of
it. I just heard something fall over somewhere. Thank you. Thank you. I really liked, you know, this idea of activating the imagination of how things could be, you know, and I think that like even I think it was Kim again talking to legislators who have no idea. You know, you have to trigger some curiosity in them. Well, you know, what could it be like for our farms if we truly supported them? So I think imagination is a big player here. Nagisa?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the fact that when you go through your everyday life, most people have no idea what farmers are doing. And so if you can link the changes in our climate to what we personally have to do differently, I think that can help bridge people to understand why they should worry about it even. Because I think, frankly, I mean, okay, they might know that their strawberries are coming earlier, that they have more diversity in produce, and they have a longer season. They might notice some of those things, but they really have no idea what farmers are going through, that we're struggling to take care of the livestock because the heat is so intense, that we have to change our varieties because we need more heat resilient plants. We need to switch to perennial farming because you know, we can't till the ground as much, and we need to take care of the soil more carefully. You know, I think there are many things we can say that will help people understand why this is such a fundamental issue for farmers across this country, because I feel like most people, they might bother to grow a couple herbs and a tomato plant, but they have no idea what we're doing. So it's really more about understanding, and I frankly think that means we'll be more credible if we talk about it that way, because it's our own personal experience. It's not science redacted so that we can, you know, share it with the masses. It's just plain and simple what we're struggling with.
Thank you. Emma, I see your hand up.
Sorry, guys. Yeah, that train of thought really just leads me to think about education and what NOFA, what's happening, what's occurring here. supporting educational organizations. I work at the farm school in Athol, Massachusetts, and I like where the weather is getting me down, and I'm not sure that what I'm doing is right. It's conversations like these that make me feel strong enough to go on and keep educating, because I feel like that is one of the most powerful tools when we talk about hope in climate change. When we talk about talking to children, just letting them know what it is like.
Thank you, Emma. Unfortunately, it was difficult to hear everything you've said, and but thank you. And again, I'm just looking through my notes here and hearing so many other examples of communication tools that all of you are engaging with. We've heard of, I think, this really nice concept of walking side by side with another person, simply to share your perspective or your experience. We've heard about documentaries, TED Talks, speculative fiction, and even heard a little bit about communication with oneself, which is, I think, what I was hearing from Emma, some of these internal dialogues that we have as we try to figure out, are we doing the right thing? And that's probably the most essential communication, so that we get ourselves in a place where we then feel that we can communicate with others in the ways that could be transformative at any scale. I think, unfortunately, we're running close to time here. We didn't get to do half of what I'd hoped for, but really what I'd hoped for was a space where we could just hear each other, what we're struggling with around communication on what is a scientifically proven existential question that we're all facing at this point. I did want to just give you a taste of what I thought we might do, because I do think it's a practical tool that you might be able to work on in your own situations or in your own organizations or whatever it is that you're doing. So I am just going to share my screen very quickly. If I can get the right thing to show you, just one moment. Now I have it.
And Emma, maybe you can queue up the evaluation and auction links to share before people log off too.
What we were going to do in our breakout groups is something I've used many times when I've done these kinds of workshops before. We were going to break up into 3 groups, and each group was going to have a scenario. I'm going to read this one scenario to you now, but I do recommend that you use this technique with your own work. This scenario, there were 3. You run a farm that sells through a farm stand and wholesale to local grocery stores and co-ops that pride themselves on selling local produce. A warm winter and unexpected cold snap, I think one of you brought that up today, kills off all your peaches and nectarines, representing about 50% of your annual revenue. You decide to bring produce in from a farm in New Jersey. How would you communicate this to your customers? So we're not going to be able to have this discussion now, but I do think there's a lot of value in taking a very, very concrete situation or scenario that any of you find yourselves in, whether it's talking with a friend or talking with the legislator, imagining what that situation would be like, and then running through what are going to be the most effective communication tools, because they're going to be different for every single audience that you try to communicate with. So what I have done in the past with other groups is provide these tailor-made scenarios, because I know some of you are probably in this situation or in one of the other scenarios that I wrote. And it really provides a really concrete example around which you can practice thinking, what would be the best way, knowing all these tools that are out there that I've been hearing about, to communicate to my specific audience. So unfortunately, we weren't able to do all of that today, but I did want you to know that this is a technique that I don't think would be complicated for any of you to just practice on your own, even when you're out walking your dog, if that's what, when you think about such things. So I think we're probably out of time at this point. It was wonderful to hear from each of you. I work with some of you, so I look forward to continuing to work with you, and hopefully I'll run into the rest of you as we continue communicating about this urgent issue. So I will pass it back to NOFA for evaluations and any other housekeeping. Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. This was a great conversation. Thanks, Stephen, for providing the structure. Yeah, we have to leave it here. We hope folks will join us for sessions the rest of the week, perhaps on Saturday as well, in person or online. Emma will plop the evaluation and auction links in, which are both online. Perfect. There we go. Thank you all so much for being in this space and sharing. I wish we could talk